The first time I saw it, I thought it was part of the wreck. It showed up at the very edge of the sonar screen, just a vertical shape where there shouldn't have been anything vertical at all. We were surveying a debris field about 42 nautical miles off the coast. The job was routine. I worked as a sonar technician on a contracted research vessel. Our assignment was to map the remains of a cargo ship that had sunk 6 months earlier. Insurance documentation, mostly. Position confirmation, structural condition, that kind of thing. My shift started at 2200. Night work was quieter, less chatter on the bridge, less movement overhead. At 2217, I logged the contact. Unidentified vertical object. Approximate height, 3.2 meters. Width, less than 1 meter. Position logged, timestamped. I marked it as debris and moved on. The ocean floor there was mostly flat sediment, occasional wreckage, broken sections of hull, containers that had split open on impact. Nothing unusual, except that vertical shape. Most debris settles horizontally. Things fall over. This hadn't. At 2240, I passed the coordinates to the ROV team. They sent the drone down about an hour later. I watched from the control room while they guided it in. The ROV lights cut through the dark water slowly. Particles drifted past like dust. The wreck came into view first, then the object. It wasn't part of the ship. It stood about 20 meters away from the nearest debris, embedded in the sediment. Upright. It looked smooth, not jagged like broken metal, not irregular like rock. It was narrow, straight. The pilot rotated the camera around it. No visible seams, no markings, no corrosion. The surface reflected the ROV lights faintly. One of the engineers asked if it was part of a mast, but the cargo ship hadn't had anything that shape, and it was too far from the wreck. At 2312, we lost video for 3 seconds, just static. Then it came back. The object was still there. Nothing had changed. We logged it as unidentified debris. At the end of my shift, I added the coordinates to the report. Object ID, U17. Depth, 312 meters. Position, verified. The next night, it was still there. Same height, same position, same orientation. I compared the sonar returns side by side. Identical. Sediment hadn't shifted. Nothing around it had changed. At 2305, the ROV team sent the drone again. This time they moved closer, within 2 meters. The camera showed the base where it met the seafloor. It went straight into the sediment. No visible support. No debris piled around it. Just clean entry, like it had been placed there. At 2319, the pilot extended the manipulator arm. He didn't touch it. He stopped about 10 centimeters away. He said he wanted to check stability. The arm hovered there for a few seconds. Then the video cut again. Longer this time, 7 seconds. When it came back, the arm was retracted. The pilot said he hadn't moved it. He thought maybe the current had pushed it. But the current readings were minimal, less than 0.3 knots. The object hadn't moved. The third night, I noticed something else. It appeared slightly taller. Not by much, maybe a few centimeters. I checked the measurements. The sonar scaling was correct. I recalibrated it anyway, ran the scan again. Height, 3.27 meters. I went back to the first log, 3.21 meters. I assumed it was an error. Resolution differences, angle variance, sediment shift. I didn't report it. At 2248, I saw another return. Smaller, closer to the wreck. Another vertical line. Object ID, U19. Height, 1.1 meters. I called the ROV team.
They hadn't seen it before. They sent the drone down. It was there. Same shape, same surface, embedded in the seafloor, upright. The next morning, I reviewed the previous scans again. U-19 hadn't been there the night before. There was nothing at those coordinates. Flat sediment. Clear. I checked the positioning logs. No drift, no mapping error. That night, there were 3. U-17, U-19, and a third, shorter, further out. The captain asked if they were parts of the wreck shifting, but they were too far apart and too uniform. The insurance company told us to continue mapping and not interfere. We weren't authorized to recover unidentified objects, just document. So we did. Every night, there were more. Not many, 1 or 2 at a time, always upright, always embedded. Different heights, different distances, but always within the debris field. By the 7th night, there were 11. The ROV pilot stopped getting close. He said the cameras kept glitching near them. Brief static, signal drop, nothing consistent, but enough that he noticed. At 23:26 that night, I logged something else. One of the earlier objects, U-17, was shorter, by almost 20 centimeters. I checked the scaling again, ran the scan twice. Same result. Height, 3.08 meters. I pulled up the video from the first night, compared the base position. The sediment line was higher on the object now, like it had sunk deeper or been pulled down. The next night, it was shorter again, 3.01 meters. By the 10th night, U-17 was gone. No debris, no disturbance, just flat sediment. The others were still there, standing. The insurance survey ended 2 days later. We moved on to a different site. Before we left, I saved copies of the sonar logs, just personal records. Something about it didn't make sense. 3 months later, I checked the public seabed mapping database. Our survey area had been rescanned. I found the coordinates, opened the file. There were no vertical objects, none of them. Not U-17, not U-19, nothing. Just the wreck, collapsed further now, settling. I thought maybe they'd fallen over, buried, or been recovered. But there were no recovery reports, no documentation, no mention of unidentified debris, just the wreck and flat sediment. I compared the timestamps. The rescan had been done at night. Same depth, same grid pattern, same resolution. I zoomed in on the exact coordinates where U-17 had been. There was a faint depression in the sediment, narrow, vertical, like something had been there recently, and then pulled straight down.
The first thing I noticed was that he surfaced too far away from the buoy. Not dramatically far, maybe 40 meters, but enough that it didn't make sense. We had descended together, and Daniel was careful about ascent lines. He was the one who had trained me years earlier. He believed in routines, predictable procedures, no improvisation underwater. When I saw his head break the surface, I remembered checking my watch. 10:42 a.m. He was 7 minutes later than planned. I raised my arm and waved. He didn't wave back. At the time, I assumed he just hadn't seen me. We were diving a site about 3 kilometers off the coast, a reef slope that dropped from 18 meters down to around 32. Nothing technical, no penetration, no overhead environments, just a survey dive. We'd been hired to photograph anchor damage for a coastal management report. Daniel handled the camera rig. I handled the slates and reference markers. The water was calm that morning. Visibility was around 15 meters, slight current from the east. We entered at 9:58, descended along the buoy line, reached the bottom at 10:04. Everything was normal. We followed the reef edge slowly. Daniel stopped every few meters to take photos. He was methodical. He adjusted his buoyancy constantly, careful not to disturb sediment. At 10:31, he signaled that he was turning back. At 10:35, he gave the ascent signal. We both checked pressure, both within safe limits. We began ascenting. At around 12 meters, I stopped to adjust my mask. It took maybe 10 seconds. When I looked up, Daniel was already above me, higher than he should have been, ascenting faster. I remember thinking I'd remind him about ascent rates later. I followed. But when I reached the surface, he wasn't there. Just the buoy and open water. I waited. At 10:42, he surfaced, 40 meters away, floating on his back, regulator out of his mouth, mask still on. I waved. He didn't respond. I started swimming toward him. Halfway there, he rolled over, removed his mask, and just looked at me. No signal, no thumbs up, nothing. His face looked normal, but he didn't say anything. When I reached him, I asked if he was okay. He nodded. That was all. No explanation for surfacing away from the line. No comment about the ascent. We floated there for a minute. Then he said, calmly, "I lost sight of you." That didn't make sense. I'd been directly below him, but I didn't argue. We swam back to the boat. The captain helped us aboard. Daniel removed his gear, set it down carefully. Camera rig last. He didn't speak much during the ride back. That wasn't unusual. He was quiet after dives, usually reviewing the dive in his head. But when I asked him how the photos turned out, he paused, long enough that I noticed. Then he said, "I didn't take any." I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. The camera was still on, battery full, memory card inside. No photos. He couldn't explain it. He said he remembered holding the camera, but not using it. That afternoon, we logged the dive. Depth, 31.6 meters. Bottom time, 27 minutes. No incidents reported. Daniel wrote his section slowly, carefully. He didn't mention losing my sight, just routine observations. I assumed he'd forgotten. Over the next week, we did 4 more dives. Daniel was different. Not obviously, but enough that I noticed. He checked his gear repeatedly, more than usual, sometimes 2 or 3 times in a row. He started asking me the same questions more than once. What depth did we reach? What time did we surface? Things he normally tracked himself. On the 3rd dive after the incident, he surfaced early, said his air consumption was higher than expected, but his tank was still half full. He showed it to me, then stared at the gauge, like he didn't trust it. After that, he canceled the remaining dives, said he needed time off. 2 weeks later, he called me, asked if I still had the dive logs. I said yes. He asked for the exact time he surfaced that day. I told him, 10:42. He didn't respond right away. Then he said, "That's not what I have." He told me his computer showed 10:36, 6 minutes earlier. I said that wasn't possible. I'd been on the surface the whole time. I would have seen him. He said nothing, then asked if I was sure. I was. I remembered watching the buoy, watching the empty water, waiting. He thanked me, hung up. A few days later, he asked if we could meet. He brought his dive computer, scrolled to the dive profile, descent, bottom time, ascent, surface time, 10:36, clear, time-stamped, no gaps, no errors. According to his computer, he surfaced normally, at the buoy, with me, but I knew he hadn't. I'd watched the water, empty, until 10:42.
He asked me something else, something I hadn't thought about. He asked me where he thought I'd been during those 6 minutes. I didn't have an answer. Months passed. Daniel stopped diving, said he couldn't focus anymore, said things felt out of sequence. That was his phrase, out of sequence. He started keeping notebooks, writing down times, locations, conversations. He said it helped. One evening, he showed me something, a page from the day of that dive. He'd written it that afternoon. Under the dive summary, there was a sentence, just one, smaller than the rest, almost like he hadn't wanted to include it. It said, "Ascended alone." I asked him what it meant. He said he didn't know. He didn't remember writing it. He said he didn't remember losing my sight or surfacing away from the buoy. He only remembered ascending, reaching the surface, and seeing me already there, waiting. Last year, I went back to that site, not to dive, just to be there. I watched the buoy from the boat. The water was calm, clear, empty. I stayed for about an hour. At 10:42, I checked my watch, without really meaning to. I don't know why. Nothing happened, just the buoy, moving slightly with the current. When I was about to leave, I looked over the side, into the water. The visibility was good. I could see down maybe 10 meters. The buoy line descending, straight down. At first, I thought I saw a reflection, movement, low, near the edge of visibility, something vertical, still. I watched for a few seconds. It didn't move. It was probably just the line, or shadow, or debris. But for a moment, I had the impression that someone was there, exactly where Daniel should have been, 6 minutes before he surfaced.
The first time I saw him, I assumed he was part of the previous shift. He was already standing on the bottom when our lights reached him, not moving, just upright, facing slightly away from us. At 54 meters, details are limited. Light fades quickly, even during the day. Colors flatten. Everything becomes blue and gray. But there was no mistaking the shape. A diver, full gear, standing on the seabed. We hadn't sent anyone down yet. I worked saturation support for an offshore maintenance vessel in the Campos Basin. Our job was routine infrastructure inspection, pipeline brackets, valve housings, anchor points. We worked in rotations, 2 divers in the water, 1 standby diver in the bell. Everything logged, everything timed. On that dive, I was diver 2. Mateus was diver 1. Bell lockout was at 13:12. We descended slowly. The bell settled onto the frame at 54 meters. Visibility was around 6 meters, silty bottom, fine sediment. Mateus exited first. I followed 30 seconds later. We moved along the guideline toward the manifold. Our helmet lights swept across the bottom. That's when I saw him, off to the right, about 4 meters away, standing. I stopped. Mateus kept moving for another step before noticing I wasn't beside him. He turned his head. His light passed over the figure. He froze too. We both stood there. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Then Mateus said over comms, "Control, confirm no divers in the water." Control answered immediately, "Confirmed, only divers 1 and 2, standby in bell." Mateus asked again, "Confirm no prior deployment today." Confirmed. We moved closer, slowly. The diver wasn't attached to any line, no umbilical, no bubbles. He stood with arms at his sides, helmet forward, standard commercial gear, or something very close to it. The surface was pale, discolored. I remember noticing the boots. They were partially buried in sediment, like he'd been standing there a while. Mateus circled him. I stayed where I was, watching,
waiting for movement. There was none. Mateus reached out, touched the shoulder. The figure shifted slightly, tilted, then settled back, too easily, too loose. Mateus pulled his hand back. "Control," he said. "We have an unaccounted diver on the seabed." There was a pause. Then Control asked for clarification. Mateus repeated it. Control asked if it was debris. He said no, it was a diver, standing. They told us not to interfere, just document. Mateus activated his helmet camera, moved around the figure, filmed from all angles. There were no markings I recognized, no company logos, no reflective identifiers. The helmet visor was dark, opaque. We couldn't see inside. Mateus leaned closer, wiped a section of the visor with his glove. A cloud of silt drifted upward. He stopped moving, stayed there. I asked him what he saw. He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "There's nothing in there." Control asked him to repeat. He said it again. Nothing. He tapped the helmet, a dull sound, hollow. He turned back toward me. I remember noticing how slow his movements were, measured, like he didn't want to disturb anything. Control instructed us to return to task, log the position, avoid contact. We did. The manifold inspection took another 18 minutes. I kept glancing back. The diver never moved, never shifted, just stood there. At 13:49, we returned to the bell. Mateus entered first. I followed. As I turned before closing the hatch, I looked back once more. He was still there, standing in the same place, facing the same direction. The coordinates were logged. Object ID UAD-01. Unidentified autonomous diver. That was Mateus's wording. He was particular about reports, precise. We expected recovery to be scheduled. It wasn't. 2 days later, we were assigned another dive, same site, same manifold. Bell lockout at 9:06. Mateus and I again. We descended, reached the bottom, exited the bell. I looked immediately toward where the diver had been. He was gone. No disturbance in the sediment, no tracks, no depression, just flat seabed. I told Mateus. He said he saw it too, or didn't see it. We informed Control. They said no recovery had taken place, no other dive teams had been deployed, nothing had been removed. Mateus and I checked the coordinates. Exact match. Nothing there. The rest of the dive was routine, but near the end, Mateus stopped suddenly. He was looking past me, toward the bell. I turned. At first, I didn't see it. Then I did. A figure, standing near the bell frame, motionless, facing us. Same suit, same helmet, same posture. Mateus didn't speak. Neither did I. Control asked for status. Mateus said, "He's here, again." Control asked who. Mateus didn't answer. The figure hadn't been there when we exited the bell. I was certain of that. We would have seen him. Mateus started walking toward it, slow, careful. I followed a few steps behind. The figure remained still. At 3 meters away, Mateus stopped, reached out. The figure leaned slightly, then settled, same as before. Mateus looked back at me, then at the helmet. He hesitated. Then he raised his hand, knocked once on the visor. A hollow sound. He waited. Nothing happened. Then Control said something that didn't make sense. They asked Mateus why he'd left the bell. Mateus said he hadn't. Control said, "Diver 1, you are still inside the bell." Mateus didn't respond. I looked at him. He was right in front of me.
Control repeated it, said their camera showed Diver 1 inside, standing by the hatch. Mateus slowly turned his helmet toward me. We both knew there was no camera inside the bell, only outside, facing the frame. Control's voice sounded uncertain now. They told Diver 1 to respond. Mateus answered, said he was outside, with me. There was a long silence. Then Control told us to return immediately. No further explanation. We did. Mateus entered first. I followed. As I turned before closing the hatch, I looked back once more. The other diver was gone. Inside the bell, Mateus removed his helmet, sat down, didn't say anything. When we surfaced, Control didn't mention the camera or what they thought they'd seen. The incident report was brief. Unidentified debris observed. Nothing more. Mateus stopped diving after that. He transferred to surface operations. We didn't talk about it much. A few months later, he told me something. He said when he knocked on the helmet the second time, near the bell, he thought he heard something inside. Not a knock back, not movement, just breathing. Slow, steady. He said he assumed it was his own, echoing through the water. Last year, I reviewed the dive logs again, just out of curiosity. I noticed something I hadn't before. The timestamp. The moment Control said Diver 1 was inside the bell. 9:31. Exactly the same time Mateus knocked on the helmet. Exactly the same time, according to the log, Diver 1's biometrics, heart rate, respiration. Perfectly normal. Inside the bell.